Hi everyone. Today I'm talking to Tomas Petras Rupšys, who is a software engineer and the head of loyalty and members at Wix. Tomas has a bachelor's degree in informatics and a master's degree in business administration. During our conversation, we talked about capitalism, startups, communication, software developers' personality, and the challenge of balancing a leadership role with academic studies and fatherhood. Enjoy. So Tomas, thanks for being here. We planned it way ahead. So finally you have your master's degree. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks.
So how were those last weeks until submission?
Until submission of the thesis?
The final paper, yeah.
Difficult. I won't lie. Like the very last 2 weeks, I mean, they were a bit, how they put this, like I sent multiple versions. So like the weeks while I was still writing before submitting the very first initial version, those were extremely hard. But after you submit the first one, I already had like a few months until the deadline. So I was very calm, chill, and so on. So, a few weeks before the last submission, they were fine. I was just doing minor edits, nothing else. So it was okay.
I see. So would you like to speak a little bit about the reasons why you decided to study a Master of Business Administration while still having tons on your plate, like a high pressure role, family? I hope that you have some free time on top of that. So what would be your take?
Like for the last, I don't recall how many years already, I'm in a station where like my manager, let's say, is not necessarily close to where I am physically. So like learning, is a bit, how they put this, not limited, but it's a bit more difficult. So I wanted to make it a bit smoother. That was one reason, just to learn from others. And the other, like I have quite some acquaintances, friends. I had quite many acquaintances and friends who studied there where I studied now. And they were saying that, well, you should definitely do it. Like, it's definitely worth it. Like, don't even think about it. Like, you will manage somehow. It will be hard, but you will manage somehow. And I said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And, before I attempted to study, I already tried a few courses, like online courses, but not Coursera type of courses, but let's say there's this Harvard Business School online where, you can take a 1-month course. It takes quite some time, so I already evaluated, like, would it be interesting, how much of my time it would take. So I knew more or less where I'm getting. So it wasn't that big of a risk. But no, as Tyson said, like you have a plan until you get punched into the face. So COVID started. So like the whole timetable shifted a little during the study. So it was a bit more difficult than I anticipated, to be honest. But that's the past now.
Mm-hmm. So the key reason was that you wanted to accelerate your learning, if I understand correctly.
Yes, like accelerate learning and growth in a more management direction, let's say. Those topics are interesting for me, like, I don't know, for as far as I remember, I've always been listening to audio books or reading them, which are related to management, business, marketing, so on. Even while I was more in even more strictly engineering roles, or was it a mix, I was still interested in those things. So there was an interest, and I just wanted to dive deeper and also to have a paper about it.
I'm really interested how you got into leadership in the first place, but before that, I guess it would be great to spend a little bit more time on studies, because I'm a studying geek, I guess. So I'm not sure if I will ever stop doing that, because right now I'm thinking of doing a PhD on behavioral software engineering. I'm not sure if you're aware of this field.
No.
Basically psychological research on software developers and their teams, and various aspects like motivation, productivity, performance, personality, and well-being, my passion included. So speaking of your studies, I'm sure that you, throughout those years, like at least up to 10 years of working professionally, and over 5 probably being in a leadership role, I'm sure that you learned a lot, like throughout your experience while facing challenging situations, dealing with people, dealing with business problems, but still you felt that, okay, an academic degree might somehow also be beneficial in addition to that. So if you had to reflect on your academic learning as opposed to your experiential learning, how would you compare those two, and what are those, let's say, key learnings? What do you think, Thomas?
Very, very, very interesting question, because, you know, like when I decided to study, I initially decided to do that because of a material. Like where I studied, you know, like the, how to say, like the logic is that we bring professors from other universities, from top business universities around Europe, around the world. They bring them to Vilnius, you know, just for a weekend or a week or something, and, you know, you learn. And I thought, okay, great, like you can have amazing material here locally. And so I came for material. Although what I didn't expect and I got is that, like, the people with whom you study, you spend a lot of time. And even during this studying time, like I would say, well, maybe not half, but quite a significant amount of time is spent doing group work. And during that group work, although you base everything on the materials, like on the academic, you know, more academic materials that you just heard, you still combine that not only with the know-how and experience of your own, but also of others. So still, it's more, you know, experiential learning, as you said.
Indeed.
But nevertheless, you know, I think like you do learn from experience, but, you know, you always, like every time you get into some, I don't know, new situation, you usually remember, okay, so what happened in the past? Did you have a similar situation? How you dealt then? Is there something you should do differently now? So you're always in a box, you know, because you only have a limited amount of know-how. Maybe you can invent something, you know, new, like during those situations. But I think this is where the learning comes, that you hear how others deal with different situations, their thinking patterns, and so on. So, like, I think that academic material, like, it helped to structure those things, like to understand what is like the overall, how to put this, like how overall you can think about certain things, like what is the, how large is the box, basically, more or less, you know, how do people have structured it up until now.
Yeah.
So it gives like a basis for discussion, and then, you know, you, as I said, you have those discussions where you apply your own experience and learn from others.
I think I picked up on at least 3 things. So one thing are people and relationships. So you learn through spending time with those people and talking to them and exchanging. The second thing is learning in a way from others' mistakes. That's a wise way to learn, so to speak. And the final point is structure. I mean, a lot of learning, which is experiential, it goes case by case. It depends on experience. Whatever you get, you learn. But some experiences might be somewhere in the future. And by being exposed to that experience while talking to wise managers, colleagues, you can, in a way, plan ahead, so to speak, right? So,
yeah.
So speaking of those specific learnings, just to maybe to wrap it up this moment, like what were the topics that you feel were the most enlightening to you while studying that MBA degree, and anything that you maybe would like to share with others that you would like to spread knowledge or something like that?
So I think one of the important parts, especially for people coming from software engineering, like it's very easy to say that, but it's very difficult to fully grasp it and start applying it. But like we need to start thinking in a less binary way. Like, so first of all, if we think about our culture, like about the country where we live, Lithuania, like, and it's not necessarily just about us. I'm sure there are other countries who have similar patterns. So we have this tendency that we like to be like told exactly what needs to be done, right? So, like even if we look, for example, how our, I don't know, rules are written, like, when the government is working. So, we want to like find every little detail, refine it, every possible loophole. And for example, if we look at other countries, I don't know, for example, UK, like they are acting on a bit different, let's say, level. Instead of like finalizing every little detail, they act on principles. They tell the principles how you should work instead of, working.
I like that.
Like literally just looking at what is written, like looking beyond that. And I think it's like it kind of instructs you to think more rather than just to look at what's written. And I think this is where, like innovation starts to happen. You need to think more. It's a bit more difficult, but at the same time, I think it's a lot better, more efficient, because you need to spend less time, writing everything and so on. So similar thing applies. Why I mentioned this is important for software, people coming from software engineering background. Because again, and myself included, I think even up until now, I often do this. It's not that suddenly I realized and now everything is perfect. No, but you start to less think like in a fixed mindset. This growth mindset versus fixed mindset thing. So I think it's a very similar thing. Like in software engineering, we like to define things like as they are. Like, you write things and they work just that way. Although, there are some, how to say, even in engineering, if you write code, you deploy it, you launch it to millions of users, and suddenly you find out, I don't know, like hardware stopped working. Yeah, there are some mysteries anyway. So anyway, it's not binary. And I think when we talk about like team dynamics, working with people, and those things, like we cannot expect that, okay, like we agree on something and now it will work like this. Or if somebody needs to learn something, so that person, will never learn it anyway. Or that, if we're introducing some rule that, you need to clarify that rule into every little detail, and we cannot just try to be a little more open in the beginning. So I think that's the main thing I kind of learned, because it's kind of specific to the industry, to this industry, like to engineering, internet, to people who are more, more into science stuff, let's say, rather than compared to, I don't know. I understand it sounds a bit stereotypical. I mean, there are various people on all the sides, but there is some, I think, generalization that we could make a little. So that's one of the things.
That's so counterintuitive, because when you think about academic studies, you would guess that you will find those answers. You will find a theory, you will find a model that works in that situation, doesn't work in the other. And you go to study, maybe expecting something like that. Not saying that you did, but let's say I would. And then what you find that life is complex. There are no ones and zeros in life. Grow up.
Like, I think there are some memes about developers even, but, there's a life cycle when, in the beginning, you feel you know nothing. Then at some point you feel you know everything. And then after a few years, you understand that you know completely nothing. Like there's so much in this world that you don't understand in this topic. So, and I think that shows, like the seniority of a person, that like it's impossible to know everything.
What's the syndrome called where people...
Imposter syndrome.
There are two syndromes. So one syndrome is that shows maybe lack of self-esteem, lack of confidence about your knowledge, and you feel that you don't know nothing and you will never know. And then there is a opposite of that. I think it's Kruger, something with the word Kruger related.
Kruger's effect. You heard about it, but couldn't remember.
Google Kruger's
we need to Google
syndrome. Dunning-Kruger effect. So Dunning and Kruger are the authors that came up with this. And basically what it shows is that there are situations when people think that they know a lot, then they are experts on something like that, and they can be opinionated. And I think maybe it's a bad impression, but when I was working in IT recruitment and I was talking to engineers like every day, but not like on a counseling level, like now, but more like on a recruitment level. So getting to know their careers better, understanding them personality-wise and what they think about life. And there is a group of people who, if let's say you say something somewhat opinionated as well, just to trigger them a bit, just to get something from them and see how they think about it. And you would say that, oh, but what do you think that Angular is legacy? Or maybe React is the way? Or what do you think that there's no need to use your own physical machines? You should go to the cloud, and just throw something very general and just see how they react. And you will get also an opinionated reaction, as if the person would, he knows everything or she knows everything. And as an engineer, and who hired a lot of engineers, and we worked as partners when you were my client, and on your side, how do you see this Dunning-Kruger effect playing out, let's say nowadays in software development? What's your take on that? Just a spontaneous topic. We are not planning to talk about it, but still interesting.
To be honest, I would go even beyond that, like, beyond just software engineering. I think in general, we can see this in, let's say, elder people, for example. Sometimes, that, oh, I've seen so much, so I really know this stuff, and it's actually, I guess, normal, right? To think that you are really experienced at something, and I think that's why I think that humbleness is very important, by the way. Like, I think it's a very important virtue that, like, if at some point a person assumes that he or she knows everything, like, that's a red flag, in my opinion, always. And even now, I said always, so, it sounded like as I really know something, right? And so I think, things can change every day. Like, there are new stuff coming up every day, and we are living in the times where there are so many changes that it's even very difficult to keep up with the changes. So thinking that you know everything and that you know the best answer is, I think, a too strong statement to make. Like, so I think we need to accept that we don't know everything, that it's likely we will make mistakes, for that day, for that situation, given the knowledge people have, you can make the assumptions what do you think are the best options. So yeah, I'm in agreement with, if you see someone really like fixed on something that, hey, no, this is terribly bad and like no other path is good, you need to think a bit wider.
Totally. And I totally understand that this effect is not at all affecting software developer population, but nevertheless, there's a paradox. Or, for example, you meet a older person, let's say our parents, and let's say we talk about politics or some sociological situation. For example, the likelihood of having a war in Lithuania, or, for example, the risk of economic crisis. So these are topics that somewhat can be predictable in terms of the fact that these people have experience going through wars, going through difficult periods like crises. And I think it's sometimes, not sometimes, I think always it's important to listen to the oldest man or woman in the room or person, because they have something to say. And certain things, they repeat. My father is a historian, so he always says that history repeats in cycles, So on the one hand, yeah, sometimes it can seem that they are those like affected by that Dunning-Kruger syndrome. But when it comes to software developers, tell me what you think. You are in a place where you learn things that change like every day. New frameworks are created, new practices are created, new ways to structure code, new best practices. And in a way, you would think that these people should be super open-minded because, there are so many ways how you can create software. But at the same time, you face people who seem very opinionated. And when it happens, as a psychologist, I cannot think that of anything else other than some core personality differences, something particular about this group of people. And my hypothesis is that if, let's say, someone who's listening is in this place where he or she thinks that, okay, he knows the best answer, he knows the way, I'm not sure if it's a way to live a happy life. I think it's affecting team dynamics, it's affecting your family dynamics, how you engage with your partner or children or anyhow. So if you would have to lean on a bit on the software developer population and your experience with engineers in general, because it's a developer podcast, so how would you maybe comment this dynamic? First of all, if you noticed that, and second of all, what's your take on that?
I mean, if I notice if a developer has, if developers have,
yeah, how much is it a problem and how much is like a bad impression on my part? I would like to be educated.
bad, you mean bad impression, you mean that developers have a tendency when they have a tendency to think that they know something really well or too well, and they're very opinionated about it, that affects their well-being.
That's one point that I'm interested in. One point, if you notice this phenomenon in the first place, and if you do, what's your take on this phenomenon's impact on their health, on the team, on organization? Any if you had to philosophize, how would you engage with this topic?
Of course it affects team dynamics. Usually, it really depends on all the participants in the team, right? So for example, if you have two super opinionated people and they disagree, what happens then?
What happens?
It's a ticking bomb, basically, because if they disagree or you have a constant conflict, then other members in the team see that. So it's like elephant in the room, but one of these need to move to another team or maybe out of the company or change personally, because otherwise, I personally, I have seen such cases. I never, it wasn't that I've seen tens of them, but definitely more than 3. It's usually a case that it affects that you need to do something, because people then either themselves, interestingly, that those people who are the ones super opinionated are not necessarily the ones telling that, oh, something is wrong in the team. It's usually those others who are sitting and listening to those two fighting, right? So so that's one option. Again, everything depends on the overall team dynamics. Another option is, let's say you have one person in the team who is super opinionated and others are not. Then again, it depends, if for the rest of the team members this fits and that opinionated person is dictating things in a way that others think it's cool.
Sorry, dictating is a very good word.
Yeah. So if that person is dictating, then for others, they think it's cool. What they think is the bad thing in that situation is the growth of those other team members, because usually, and this is not necessarily related to a person being super opinionated. This is more in general, when you have one super strong leader or a person who not necessarily, I'm not saying necessarily a title leader, but a leader, like a person just can be like individual contributor, but is just a leader of the team. Like, like you can see that, you can feel that.
Yeah.
And if that person, is taking care of everything, is answering all the questions, what happens is that others either get into the comfort level, which then affects their growth because they don't need to think about anything. Like, they're just waiting for that leader to solve everything and so on. Or then others might decide that, well, it's not the right place for myself, like to be near that person, and change the team. So that's another, risky option. And one more, if there is a very opinionated member in the team, and others dislike those opinions, then, like, again, the dynamics will be terrible. Like, it's a ticking bomb, basically, again.
In Counter-Strike, we have the terrorists and we have the counter-terrorists. And when terrorists put a bomb, the CTs or counter-terrorists, their job is to defuse it. And if you allow me to challenge you a bit, changing teams, I think it's an easy solution. Let's say taking the person out of the team and putting somewhere else. Agreeing with the person that they leave, it also seems like an easy solution. But I realize that there are situations that's the only solution. But just maybe on this note, to look for maybe additional solutions, like, maybe it comes from your experience working in American-ish companies, where is that culture, you either succeed or you're being fired. I'm not sure if this philosophy is embodied by you, but I think it can be a solution, but it's not the only solution. And I think that it's important to provide an opportunity for the person maybe to become aware of one's behavior and to face oneself and have a good conversation that, look, dude, you're competent, you're wise, you're professional, but the way you conduct yourself is not good for the team. What can we do to increase the harmony and safety among the team members? Because we appreciate your knowledge, but at the same time, your behavior can seem toxic, And this is why, I'm working in counseling coaching to provide maybe a possibility for these managers to improve. At the same time, it seems that the easiest solution is what you described. So sorry for that rant, but now the question, why do you think that managers in tech maybe tend to take the easier path, but not necessarily to work on the people skills of the maybe more difficult members, maybe more opinionated members, maybe those especially who take a tech lead role and are important to the team?
Oh, first of all, we are in agreement. Like, if this comes by surprise to someone, there were mistakes made. We are in agreement about this one.
Okay.
Again, everything depends on teams and so on. Just maybe one remark that today we live in times when it's no secret, it's extremely difficult to find engineers. Right? And retaining engineers is even more difficult, right? And like the businesses, usually they, unless they shrink, then that's known, but usually businesses grow, they move forward, there are new customers and so on, which means the pressure is growing. Like, the question is, like, if the company is growing faster than you can find enough people, like, who gets the most pressure then? So the answer usually is the existing people. And at least, from what I assume happens in other companies and so on. And usually, like, the most of that pressure comes to the leaders of those teams, because, like anyway, they are expected to deliver results, even though they're under capacity and so on. So the pressure is high on them, right? So, how do you put this? Like there is the saying, if everybody were doing everything what experts recommend, let's say, you need to use floss like 4 times a day, like you need to keep jogging every day, you need to do a half an hour of yoga, you need to sleep 8 hours and so on. So probably we do nothing but just listening to those opinions. So what you need to do, you need to prioritize, right? So you need to choose what are the most important things for that day in your life, in the situation. Like everything really depends on the context. Like there is no one answer, I would say. So if you have capacity, time, and you believe yourself, and I think this one is super important for someone who needs to, who is a lead. You need to believe that you can grow that person, that you can change, but it's the right saying, that you can help that person to somehow change. And how difficult it is to change someone. Usually it's impossible, right? But if you believe that there are ways, maybe it's enough to tell and so on. Yeah, but is that always happening? Again, depends on the context, on person, and so on. So,
yeah, 3 words which you mentioned, I think, are very important: capacity, time, and belief. I would use also the word hope, which is a bit wishy-washy, but hope that the person can change. And I think what we picked on is like an important topic. One topic about the state of software engineering industry on the one hand, and also hope in people's ability to change on the other hand. And just to maybe to provide some ground for our discussion. So just few rants. So speaking of industry, yeah, I totally get it. When customer needs are increasing every day and you want to deliver, you want your company to grow and flourish, of course you get into these problems. Now, I sometimes ask myself, why do you need to grow? You can put a cap on your annual revenue and say, we are happy about it. But that's not how business people work. Growth is like, for some reason, a value in itself that you have to follow. But why? So,
but now, Povilas, you triggered me a little, because there is this,
let's stop here.
So
let's talk here a bit, and later we will get into that hope part. But
sure.
Let's talk about this part. Why business people think that they need to grow? Where does it come from? Let's psychoanalyze this part. And if you have any personal thoughts or experiences, so feel free to share.
Yeah. So this sentence of yours triggered me a little, because there is there is the saying, managers, they are it's always their fault, right? Similarly, I don't know what would be an alternative saying, I guess you as a therapist, I'm not into psychology, but
I'm not putting
when you
guilt.
Look deeper,
sorry, but just one thing to clarify. I'm not putting guilt on the leader per se. What I'm maybe asking the question about is about the trends, what is okay in business and what is not okay. And as I said, there's no need to grow exponentially. It comes from somewhere. I'm not saying that it's their fault, but maybe it's a system's fault. So just to clarify, yeah, and go ahead.
Yeah. So of course, this is how the world runs, the economy and so on. So if we went to, I don't know, employees of some random company and we said, hey guys, now the inflation is what, at once it was 15%, and we asked, hey guys, we put a cap on the business, so now no more salary increases, just live with this inflation. So I expect the employees will say, oh, so can't we grow the business, right? So I don't think that it's just business people who are always about the growth.
That's a good point.
So I think it's human, not sure if it's human nature, to be honest. I'm not an expert in that. I guess the this is how the economy runs. Like, everything runs more or less around money. So if you want it, you need to do something, and that's a cycle we are all into.
So speaking of that cycle, so I guess I'm totally out of my maybe comfort zone, like in terms of the topic, because now we're getting into economics and what is a sustainable way to maintain, let's say, growth in the world and make people happy and reduce suffering in a way. And it totally makes sense that if you want to reduce suffering, you want to increase salaries, and you want to keep the cycle going, so you have to have, I guess, that growth mindset. And it's a honorable way to do. I mean, don't get me wrong, business people, business owners, they are contributing a lot to society for this cycle to happen, on one hand. On the other hand, also, I don't think that this thought is still thought out enough among those circles, because there are different ways how you can grow, and it doesn't have to be, that fast startup. We grow every year, how to say, using venture capital to make it as fast as possible. I'm not saying that growth is bad. I'm just saying that there are certain ways how growth happens that it seems that creates those problems. Of course, we have to go after inflation, but still, what's your take on that? I mean, just maybe you have a wiser opinion, because on the one hand, I understand the world runs the way it runs, but is there like some room for more wiser decisions when it comes to growth, and especially in the startup world, where it seems that hysteria of growing every year, like doubling people-wise, employees-wise, doubling revenue-wise. What's that all about?
Like, nobody is forcing them to do it, right? So it's people doing their own choices at the end of the day. Like, you always have a choice not to work in such company, right?
Sure.
Earn less. Like, everyone is free, at least here.
Yeah.
Right, in our country. So I think we make those choices on our own. Probably there is some better option, just how the society could run. Just like, I guess there is no better than the existing one. It's like with democracy, it's not perfect, but nobody found a better solution yet. And it's not necessarily just about inflation. Like, I don't know, like, imagine, there is some amazing thing you want to buy, and like, they say, well, sorry, but we just added a cap. Maybe, like, there are, I guess, small businesses which choose to do that. Like, we have long queues, of people waiting. They allow themselves to increase the prices and so on. Just no, at the same time, there are some companies, like, at the end of the day, I believe that there are quite many businesses who create, like, real value for society, but it's not just being run just for the sake of being run and push money. Like, there are great inventions, like, I don't know, electric cars and so on, like things which come closer to everyday people, just because there are those businesses, because those people are working really hard. And if they added a cap on themselves, like, like, it would come later, most likely. At the same time, for example, now our world, like, is, as we know, we have a global crisis of the climate change. So maybe we are running out of time. So if I'm, let's say, someone who believes that the world is running out of time and they really want to do something, deliver something to the whole world, maybe it's not about the money. And I believe that for many business founders, it's not about the money at some point. It's about the impact.
Yeah, totally. And if you're working on a product that might save the world, or at least prevent a bigger crisis that's already in place. So I totally understand the reasons behind that. And then you're motivated by other things like, so for example, getting people on Mars, reducing coal usage, going full electricity as much as possible. I don't know. So there are many companies that are being motivated by this decision. At the same time, no, there are companies that are not motivated by these ideals, and still the idea is just to ensure that growth, make the investors satisfied. And yeah, that's strange. Sometimes when I think about investors, they like that group of untouchable people that are somehow are more than humans. There's something else, and we have to like I mean, they're like gods that we have to follow their every
Not necessarily. Like let's look at one example with
Okay.
what happens with crypto vault, for example.
Great.
So the institutions, the financial institutions, they were not the first ones, putting lots of money into it. It were ordinary people who started pouring cash into it, right? And then the boom, like this whole balloon of the crisis, like started growing and growing. When once financial institutions saw that, okay, there are so many people who trusted, put their own money into this, and it's small sums. Then they poured money on top, and then we had a huge growing bubble, which now a bit shrinked, not a bit probably. So it's also, people, our own choices, like, which doesn't impact. We everyday consumers make choices, right? Go to one institution or the other institution, and we support those, as you say, although we always have a choice not to.
Speaking of choices, okay, so let's for the sake of discussion, let's agree that there's nothing to do about the way how capitalism works. Let's say that it's a game that we have to play if we want to survive, if we want to flourish. And let's say that the conflict is in a way programmed, that you will face situations when you have to think, okay, whether I'm focusing on company growth or whether I'm focusing, let's say, on people development, where our discussion began. And still, I think it's not, as you said, it's not binary. There are ways how to juggle growth, but also showing care towards employees. And I guess going to that note.
Just that, sorry, Pavel, like one sentence, like to make sure I was understood correctly. I think in the engineering industry, like companies working in software, if you don't take care of people, like anyway, you won't grow because you won't have people. So that's super important. Like just one remark I wanted to make clear.
Exactly. And for some reason, paying high salaries above market level, providing best equipment, providing a possibility to choose from a variety of products for this particular purpose, it's great. A lot of money is invested, but when it comes to solving like daily hassles, not basic maybe for engineers, but to me maybe somewhat basic, predictable interpersonal conflicts where emotions are involved, where frustration is involved, where unhappiness is involved. In these situations, for some reason, then you start taking the card, oh, we have investors, we have to pay attention to them, so you should better either leave or go to another team, because otherwise, my team is more important, and so if you have a problem, so make a decision. So there is that, that.
But Pavel, it's not that binary. Let's say, like if you think in an individual team's perspective, like of course it sounds easy. Oh, I just moved another person and that's it, right? But now think about this, like what if there is a big need in some other team? Like think wider, right? Like maybe there is an opportunity where that person could flourish a lot more.
Yep.
So of course, like we can keep working on growing a person, like, you know, that it starts to fit and so on. But is it worth, not just like from a leader's perspective, but also for that person? Like, why to stress that person? Like, because you understand, like, so I think it always depends on the situation. Like it's very difficult, like, to generalize
Yeah.
those things. Like it's on the
Yeah.
person, on the team, on context.
Yeah, I guess maybe I, as a HR person who maybe is not a business person, who, let's say, has a bias to ensure that people are as satisfied as possible, maybe I have a hope or a bias towards an idea that it is possible to find a resolution. And I think that maybe it's a wrong belief, but I think it's worth investing in that conflict. It's worth investing, having that conflict, but also rehashing that conflict and growing from that conflict. And you know, when you take someone from a team, even if it's a good opportunity, there is a possibility of losing a potential to grow and maybe have better fruits in the future. You know, there is those stages where you, let's say, you form, you norm, perform, and then you decide to stop. And I think that stage of you know, storming, you know, looking for ways how you can challenge each other and growing from that is important. At the same time, I realize that it's not binary, and there are indeed situations that it's just the best solution is just to take out the person and not and in a way solve the problem this way. So if you don't mind, on that hope aspect, once again, you mentioned that it's important to believe that there is a possibility for change. And would you agree that software engineers are not the most hopeful people? What's your take on that?
In terms of people growth or in general?
Let's say in general.
I honestly didn't notice, like, maybe because I'm myself in that box, I don't think I noticed any like distinctions between people who are into engineering and those who are not.
So you feel that there is anything in particular about developers and maybe a lack of hope in certain situations?
No, I think there are, you know, there are various people, you know, I
Sure.
wouldn't say that there is something specific to
Yeah.
people working in engineering.
Because what I notice sometimes, and you know, that topic of hope, when you're an analytical person and you tend to rely maybe on facts and data more than feelings, hope is a weird concept because it means that you are postponing evidence and facts, and you act despite of data. So you believe that, let's say, the product will succeed or you don't. You believe that a conflict can be solved or you don't, but you don't have evidence for that. You can try and see how it goes. And I don't say that software developers are not hopeful. It's a very maybe rash generalization. But for me, who is interested in personality and personality differences and differences between groups, I'm interested if the aspect, maybe a possibility that there is that lack of hope, there is maybe too much pseudo, sometimes rationality, pseudo data-driven decisions where we we forget that there is hope, but it's very unconscious. And we for some reason, there are a lot of, let's say, somewhat technical or data-driven decisions. Let's say we need data scientists, we need them to create interesting models, but then still we sometimes rely on our gut. And so I guess where I'm getting at, I'm just interested in your opinion on that hope aspect, and whether there is hope, let's say, on a conscious level, or there's hope on the unconscious level. And it seems that we are all hopeful as a human species, but in the software developer population, it seems that that hope is underrated, but still it plays its magic. under the hood or on the back end, so to speak?
Like in my personal opinion,
In
it's
your
not that I read
experience.
any research or anything, but
Yeah.
like you do know this thing that, you know, we look at data, we make decisions, and we think we are rational people, but actually we just make decisions based on emotions most frequently.
That's
and
Daniel
we just
Kahneman's work.
rationalize.
Yeah.
We just rationalize them afterwards.
Yeah.
So for sure, there is this tendency, and like why maybe it's a little more popular among, as we say, like people in software. It's because people might think that we are more analytical than others. So understand me correctly. I'm myself like data people are my best friends. Like I like to look at data like all the time.
Yeah.
But now imagine a situation like, let's say you need to do a surgery, and you know this surgery is risky, and you know there are two choices how to make a surgery, and then they say, you know what, like if you pick this one, like there are 45% that, I don't know, you won't walk afterwards, and if you choose this one, there is 50% that you won't walk again, right? But you know there are differences in prices, there are something else, and so on. So like at the end of the day, like, and let's say there are two different doctors maybe even doing those, right? And at the end of the day, even when you will look at the data, when it's a very little difference, like will you really make decision just based on that very small difference, or will you involve some other, you know, gut feeling based decisions? Like, did you like the doctor of that other option? Maybe the clinic looks nice, maybe the price was better, and so on and so on and so on. So
yeah, interesting. Yeah, I feel that during our conversation, I feel like a general topic of tension between us is where you feel that, I'm not sure what it's all about, but I feel that you had an idea that software developers are like everyone else, whereas maybe I tend to lean on the idea that there are specific personality or behavioral differences that maybe make this population different. And you know, I have data to prove that, and there are, you know, Stack Overflow studies, for example, they show that levels of depression and anxiety are double than in the general population if you compare it with, let's say, World Health Organization data. So let's say it's data, you know, it can be flawed. You know, although Stack Overflow, you know, they can survey up to 100,000 developers all around the world. So I think it's a legit sample. So you cannot, let's say, at least me, I cannot, when I see this result, I cannot say that, okay, it's nothing, you know, we are all more or less the same, and leave the developer alone. But, you know, maybe you got me wrong, but I want to maybe help this population. And, you know, you only can help when you identify the problem. And if you, let's say we explain it away by saying that people are all the same, there's nothing to talk about. So how to start the discussion going? You have to have at least something to start with. So maybe this is why I'm maybe biased on this topic.
No, you know, I'm myself biased because like I'm still consider myself an engineer, at least very small time amount, but still it's an engineering work, right? So maybe I'm biased, no, because I'm coming from that, and I think, well, we are all like everyone else, right?
And that's, you know, and that's also a space to become aware of one's biases, because, you know, if you allow me to put my psychologist's hat, if let's say you notice yourself being triggered by something I spoke, so it shows that we touched on something, maybe a value or belief that is important to you. And it can also, maybe speaking on a meta level, it can also be something about that tendency to maybe not to be conscious enough of certain things. So of course we are not perfect. Everyone has unconscious processes happening all over the time, but I guess my hope is that maybe I have to accept the fact that, yeah, I ask maybe sometimes too much from software developer population, maybe because I put a lot of hope in this group of people. And I think that throughout the time, more and more, we will depend on the outcomes of software developers. And we do right now. take it, Facebook, Instagram, Netflix, Tinder, our lives are basically driven by products created by these people. So I would appreciate these people to be as conscious as possible. That's like my core starting point, why I did my research on the well-being of software developers. Because I mean, if you are suffering, and if you're suffering more than everyone else, and you're creating a feature, and you have to be relatively well aware why you're creating that feature, because maybe possibly you're projecting something on the product that, you know, you feel that people are lonely, so you create a like button, but no, maybe you are lonely, and maybe you have to sort things out in your life before you're trying to sort other people's lives. So maybe it sounds like a, you know, something negative, but it's just maybe me just asking for more conscious decision making. That's it. And you know, and I work mainly with engineers or tech people in general as a counselor, and I see that there is that potential. Just people sometimes are afraid, maybe they are lazy, but there is, and people grow and they become even better decision makers. So yeah, just there was no critique on your side, but it's just, you know, my bias towards this topic. I care about it very, very much.
One thing, like it's first time I heard it, Pavel. I think it's amazing, like, because I never knew this. Like, it's a very
really
nice way
we
of
never
thinking.
talked about
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't think I remember, at least. Sorry if you said at some point, but it's a really nice way of thinking about it. Like, you know, I think you are a software engineer, like you're participating in software engineering yourself, like, because how do you put this? Like, these days and all the big tech, at least, you know, it's not just like those people writing code doing the actual software engineering, right? Like, you know, there are quite many different roles involved. And in often cases, like, at least in my personal opinion, from my experience, is that, have you heard this, you know, what are the two like most difficult tasks in computer science? Like, you know, caching validation and naming. Like, I think it's people. Honestly, I think it's, in many cases, it's people. So I really like that you picked this, because I think it's one of the most complex things in software engineering. Like, how, because it's interpersonal skills, agreeing with other teammates, agreeing with other functions, you know, finding the common ground, especially when you're working among super amazing people, like amazingly talented people who read a lot, who know a lot, like, you know, and they have their own opinions. They know the best path forward in their field, then how to match them, you know, like, you know, you have, I don't know, UX designer and a front-end developer who are amazing, like super talented. And they have a bit different opinions on something, like, and who's right, who's wrong, right? And we cannot, let's say, agree on something. And if we cannot agree on something, whose fault it is, who needs to solve that, right? So those are usually like very interesting topics. So really appreciate that you're into this, and I think it's a very interesting, difficult topic to solve.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and you're in a way putting me under the spotlight, because I'm having like a coaching moment, you know, when you're talking to someone and you get a important realization. So you provided me a coaching moment. I will tell you what was the coaching moment. So I always felt that I'm not, how to say, I'm looking for words. I'm not qualified to help engineers or help software engineering, because I'm not a software engineer. And by saying that I'm in the way I am, I really appreciate that, you know. Because, you know, that imposter syndrome, I never written like a line of code, but at the same time, I care so much. And yeah. And I would really like to code, but my parents always told me that I'm not good with mathematics, you know, and I will never be. And yeah, and I found that this passion, and it's really important to me, and I really appreciate for seeing that. Sorry for being emotional.
No, it's all good to know. We were like not remote, like would really give you a hug, Povilas. I mean, I think it's very important to tell, that like it's first thing, when you speak with people who have coded in the past or coders themselves. So sometimes you can feel this, maybe not necessarily explicitly said thing, but hey, you don't code and you don't know shit, like what are you saying me? But it's that's a bias also. Like that's true. Like of course you have advantages if you have at least coded a little, just to a bit understand the logic, what it's about, like how all the software gets built. At the end of the day, like there were times when, for example, if we think about websites, there were times when there were only people who knew how to code, launched websites. So, and those websites looked how, like, there's maybe a background, a white or black, and there are text, and that's it, like, and there were those websites before. Now imagine all the stuff we can do on the internet. Let's say, you open some social network and there is a chat which is interactive. You start getting messages in real time. There is a sound, there are different colors. You see the images, you can change those images, emojis, like recordings, audio stories, audio messages, like various things, like, and all those things, of course, they were developed at some point, but where they designed just by people writing code, where they thought about, invented just about people who wrote code, like, like also now if we think about features in the big tech, there's a lot of involvement from, let's say, people who talk with the customers, like ask their feedback, then try to rationalize that information, put into the buckets, make decisions based on that information. Like, because like one thing is to check the quantitative data, as they gave example 45% versus 50%. The other side, when the data is qualitative, like somebody says I like this, or somebody says I don't like this, what exactly do they mean? Like, can we put this on a scale from 1 to 10, right? So that's also a part. You participate in the software production part, like you're shipping the products, like you're still participating in all of it. So I think it's huge. And if we think about big tech, there are so many different roles, so many important roles. Like for example, I think there's one thing which is still relatively, well, not sure if we can say new, but many people I tell this, they usually don't know about, haven't heard about that. For example, we have, for example, people whose work is to write content. Like, imagine software. There are buttons, there are titles of pages, navigations.
Yeah, in your company, you have like those UX writers, right?
Yeah, exactly. UX writers. So there are people who think, how to explain things in the best possible way. And that's so challenging, actually. Like it's very difficult. And what is even more interesting, like you would say, those people don't write code, but the naming done on their side actually needs to connect very much with the code, because, like there are abstractions in the product, there are also abstractions in the code. And if they don't align, then there is miscommunication in the team. So,
yeah, I mean, in my research, when I say software developer, I usually define it as someone who participates in the process of creating a software product. So it's, of course, it's not only programmers who code. These are like product managers. These are people who test the code, these are people who analyze data. And also I think that writers included. Give me one moment because my nose is full of me being a pussy. So wait a minute.
No problem.
Yeah, Thomas, that was something. So where did we stop? So I told you that my parents they in a way pushed me into humanities without thinking about it. And speaking about you, I mean, this is about you, not about me. I'm really interested in how people get into software engineering. And already throughout this podcast, I got already like 4 conversation up to this, and I noticed 2 things at least. One thing, computers were introduced relatively early in a person's life, especially if it's someone who's like in their 30s, who grow up without a computer when they were born. And the other thing, it was like the influence of teachers who, let's say, saw some potential and encouraged that and maybe provided some guidance. Now maybe it's a bit different when engineering is fashionable, you know, but at that time, I'm sure that it was a bit different. So we are like in the same age group. You're like also in your 30s, right? 29, 30, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So how did you get into this? What was your parents' role in that?
Very interesting thing. You mentioned like 3 things. One is how soon the computer came into the life, the influence of teachers, well, not necessarily teachers, and parents. I think, yeah, those 3 were influential, although not in the way, I would say, it wasn't as smooth as like one could expect. I think it was not smooth at all, to be honest. So one thing, yes, I think the computers I saw in my life quite early. I really don't recall my age, but then I remember like my cousin knew some HTML. He was 5 years older than me. I was 12 maybe, and he showed me how to change the background color of the website. That
was like, this is like using so I also so maybe I'm a programmer because I used HTML when I was writing articles on different websites, and if you wanted to make it bold or in italics, you would use some form of HTML.
So you know, that was like the very first thing I came even a bit closer to like engineering in general. Of course, before that, you know, like consoles, games, and so on PC as well. Yeah, there was some. Then, you know, that same cousin actually introduced me to what was called Macromedia Flash back then. You know, you could create Flash websites, you know, where you can see like a video. So then I spent some time, you know, like learning how to create that type of Flash websites, let's say. And then there was like a period in my life where, let's say, I pushed all the engineering part actually aside, and I went a lot more into, should we say, social sciences? I don't know. But, you know, I participated a lot of like, let's say, activities for like future young leaders. Let's say there was this module European Parliament thing, which I really loved and was participating a lot. Or schools parliament, you know, activities like organizing, you know, I don't know, some like concerts or some events, you know, for the school and so on, a lot of that. Like, so there were a lot of those activities that I've been doing, you know, in my life. Like there were huge like amount of friends back then. So all like computers were just, you know, somewhere aside. And there were those thoughts, you know, okay, so what will I study? And yes, then there was, you know, let's say involvement of parents. And actually, you know, then like I remember now, like I really don't blame my parents at all. You know, we spoke about.
You can't do that here. I will not punish you.
But you know, we like back when we said, hey Thomas, you know, like, you know, you're so active, you know, participating, all those things. Are you really going to spend time on those computers? Like, you know, like, are you that kind of, you know, geek person? Like, will you like to write code? Like, probably not. And I thought, well, you know, they did not like push me hardly or anything, but I thought, well, probably they're right. And I wasn't fully sure back then what should I study. So, you know, I anyway decided that in my 12th school grade, I will, you know, learn hard, try to pass the exams amazingly, and let's see what happens. Probably I will try economics. So actually passed my exams like at very high grade, very good grades, like extremely good grades. I said, okay, let's try economics, you know, which is extremely difficult to get into. At least it was so back then, if you want to go into free spots. So I got there, and then I realized that I hate that thing so much, even though I participated like you know, those school Olympics, like, you know, those competitions, even for young economists, and kind of maybe liked it a little, but the first way was terrible. Although, and here comes the involvement of teachers. There was one thing, I don't recall exactly, was it database, probably not architecture, but something related to databases during the first year of studies of economics. And they enjoyed that thing so much, even that professor like said some, praises back then. And I thought, well, since I hate that subject so much that I'm even skipping the lectures because I don't like them, and that's usually not me because,
Our economics classes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but not that one. So I just thought then, well, maybe I should, try something else. And then, even though I didn't I didn't take informatics exam, I didn't take physics exam, I thought, okay, I'll try to switch to informatics. Let's see what happens. I switched, and I think this was the best decision of my life.
So
like not the very best, there are many best decisions, but I think this was one of them, like one of the best ones for sure.
But you haven't taken those exams that are important to enroll in this, that are required to enroll in this program. So how did you work around that?
So the workaround was you need to pass 3 exams. So there is this grade, overall grade, which is taken, which consists of 3 exam results and 1 grade from school, right? So I had so good exam results of 2 things, but it was enough to get to the informatics one.
And was it like state funded, or did you have to pay?
Yes.
Wow.
No, it was state funded.
I think it's a good example for people who also find themselves in a similar situation. I think that I hope that that's the word. I hope that the universities are now even more flexible than it was back in the day when you studied, and many people, young people, had these doubts. Okay, what should I do? And now when there's a good climate to get into software engineering or informatics in general, and if by any chance you think that it might be interesting, so you always can switch after first year or even 2 years. So it's interesting that you made this decision, and it also tells something about your lack of risk aversion, because you seem like someone who is relatively well tolerant of adrenaline. And I'm sure there are points when you were into sports, triathlon, right? And you tend to study, although you still have a lot on your plate, and you seem ambitious and you have that drive. And I think I'm interested in how much of that was already in place when you were a young person studying economics.
That's a very interesting take, because like a few weeks ago I was discussing with like one friend, and I was telling, you know what, like I'm so not risk averse, like, but sometimes I need to, I'm thinking how to change that. And there are even some friends who say, well, you should be, take more risks. Like, what's wrong with you? So it depends. I think when it's a calculated risk, I think like I will then go with my whole head and toes, to something. That's yes, and that's maybe related to, I don't know, ambition or something, or just nature, like how the way it was raised. I don't know, like honestly, like I have some thoughts, but maybe not the most important thing. But usually I'm not, I don't like too big risks, like calculated small ones, like yes. And back then, what worst could have happened by changing the status?
Okay,
probably not much. And I'm asking this question even nowadays. What's the worst thing that can happen? If there is this worst thing, and the probability is high, probably I will not take it. But if it's okay, then we'll go 100%.
Yeah, that technique of thinking about a worst situation, the image of worst varies very differently from person to person. And for some people, a worst situation would be to go abroad and just live in a different country. For others, it's being bombshelled. So the reference. We talk about these things right now. So okay. And speaking of being raised in some way, any reflections on that, what was the effect of your parents' personalities, of your parents' relationship on you as a person, and maybe in particular, leader and engineer? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think there is a strong correlation. Like it's no secret, you know. Like
yeah, but anything specific that maybe you, let's say, copied from your parents' behavior, or you learned from them, any lessons that can be shared?
You know, my father is a businessman and my mother is a university professor, specialized. I think now it's how is this thing called? Like it's more about qualitative analytic methods, like, you know, looking into qualitative methods of, you know, data. So, you know, if you think about this combo and you think about me, I think there is some correlations, like, you know, no need to go too deep. So there is this more rational side, you know, taken from one side, and there is this other
risk averse and lack of risk averse, right?
Yeah. So without going too much into details, I think definitely there was an impact. Like you can put it however you want.
Any like specific teaching or situation you remember from your interactions with your parents that still is very clear in your memory, and maybe would be interesting for people to learn that about you? Any specific memory that comes to your mind?
Not really, to be honest. Like it's I don't reflect that much on what happened in teenage years and so on. I feel like it's already past, and to be honest, there is nothing that I'm angry about. There is nothing that I'm like extremely, I don't know. So
happy.
yeah. So it's all good. Like, yeah, I think normal. Let's put it like this.
Okay, fair enough. I will not make it a therapeutic session, so don't be afraid.
Thanks, Povilas.
Yeah, but anyway, so okay, talking about maybe your later path. So when you got into informatics, you started working relatively early, and you also become a team lead very early. And it's also something that resonates with me as well, because I became a HR team lead like in my first years of being employed. So I was, I guess, how much I was after my bachelor's studies, 22, maybe something like that. And for me, it didn't work out very well. I don't think I was a good manager because I was somewhat obsessive. I had a very specific idea how things should be. I had a very specific idea what is right and what is wrong. When people agreed with me, it worked out actually very well. And unfortunately, it didn't work out very well when there were disagreements between me and other leaders, let's say production manager, IT manager, or in general. I also realized an issue that I had to work out in my therapy, that I had some dynamics with women managers because my mother was very protective, and I didn't like when my managers were overly protective. So there was a lot of learning from that experience, but I realized that I'm better on my own and I'm working solo, you know. But you seem you succeeded as a rocket in my view. So how would you describe your journey from being a economics student, then informatics student, and then going through the process of becoming a leader? Any learnings that you would like to reflect on?
Yeah, I think it may not sound very serious. Like there are things that I don't like, or people in general don't necessarily put on their CVs, but at the same time, I think they're very important.
Okay.
So like at the age of 16, like as I mentioned, I was participating all those, you know, activities. So back then I already had possibilities to try what is team leadership. For example, like, you know, I was participating with, again, as I mentioned, Module European Parliament, like thing. I'm not sure if it's still a running activity. I think it's an amazing thing. People should try it at younger ages, which this is for school age people.
To play politics,
like, you know,
a bit.
Yeah, and then, you know, where I felt I'm doing better is I'm doing better than a committee lead, than an individual contributor. because as an individual contributor, I saw myself like someone who goes quite angry about something, and people not necessarily like vote for my ideas, and but when I'm doing like a committee team leadership, like in more a coaching session,
I say facilitating process, getting ideas on the table, right?
And I saw that I really like it, and I thought that others also kind of showed that okay, it's quite good that how you were doing this. So, or like school parliament activities also, it seems childish school things on, but like you put it however you want. It's still like interpersonal skills between humans, right? So there is still, doesn't matter if you are working in, of course the stakes are higher and so on,
sure.
But still, back then at those early ages, the stakes are different, right? Different things are important in their lives. It still seemed very important, very, so back then I was already able to test it out. I think I was 17 when I participated like young businessman like thing. So there were quite many things that I tried in that era, even before getting to university years. So when I went to the university, I pretty much knew that I will go into that direction. I have tried it. I had chances to try it through various, like off-class activities, which I would highly recommend to people who are in their school ages. So I knew this will happen. At the same time, I knew that there are those two schools, like two directions, and not always it's binary, by the way, but there are people saying that those who are managers don't need to be good at what they manage. And there is this other school which says if you want to manage something, you need to be good at what you like, at that topic at least, right? So I'm more lean towards that part, that you do need to know what you're managing. Like, of course, there are certain roles where you don't need to necessarily know everything, that for sure. But I think if you want to be great, you need to know.
Why do you think? If you had to provide specific reasons why a background in software engineering, let's say technically wise, when you had this education, when you know how to write code, you know the process, how it happens, why this specific background is important for a software engineering manager?
Not necessarily for software engineering manager. I would say for any type of leader in a software organization.
I don't care about others. I am interested in software engineering.
Yeah. Okay. So like there are multiple parts here. So one part is like at the end of the day, as a leader, you need to show a path or help people to go to a certain path, right? You need to show the path. Okay, guys, and gals, now this is the direction we need to take. So when you're presenting, you can have amazing presentation skills. You can go to many coaches, like how to do public speaking and so on. But at the end of the day, people like they are smart. They know who you are. They know what you did in the past. Like, so they will say, who is this guy? Like, what he's talking about? Like, he doesn't know shit, right? So how can he, tell me what to do if he doesn't know what he's talking about, right?
And just to stop here a bit, a little excursion. That's, I think, a problem why engineers might get into conflict with testers, product managers, UX, UI people, and related. So we talked in the beginning why it's important to understand how to write code. And I think you're providing very good reasons why it's important, at least for the team, So yeah, continue.
Yeah. So that's one part. If you have that background, of course, at the same time, if you went to, I don't know, a group of, let's say UX designers, for example, and you have software engineering background, well, then that skill of yours is not that much important. Although I think there's another strength that you have having that background, and that strength is that you should act as a bridge then. You understand? As I mentioned, there are many roles involved in big tech when you're developing something. And at the end of the day, all the thoughts, all the brain power that you do, it needs to come down to, to a line of code. So now how to handle, how to help everyone to talk in a way that, you put it in this line of code. How do how do you help your developers? How do you help your designers to translate what they want in a way that makes sense, to be put into the code? So that's the other like strengths that you can have. And if you don't have that background, like of course you can try to facilitate people, like help them with the interpersonal things and so on, help them to figure it out on their own, utilize, of course that's doable. Like, I'm not saying that it's impossible. There are many companies like here in US, whatever, there are many leaders who don't necessarily have this, experience. Although I think it's more effective. Like, I think Elon Musk agrees on that. Like, not saying he's the like
totally
someone
agrees.
of an example person. That
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure if I'm that much into that direction. I think he's very like strict.
I mean, I think that he is still a chief architect in Tesla.
Chief scientist.
Chief scientist?
SpaceX at least.
Or SpaceX, something like that. But maybe he's also an architect in Tesla and chief scientist in SpaceX. Who knows? I mean, he likes to work a lot. And speaking of working a lot, you seem like also someone who likes to work a lot. And I'm not sure if that's another thing that maybe helped you get into this area, because it's one thing to have your own responsibility and write that code, create that feature for that sprint or whatever, and the other thing is to manage the group of people who have to do that, to help them, to facilitate them, to deal with business issues, as we say in Lithuanian, to gesinti gaisrus. So it's a very responsible job that people, they can get burned out by that. And we once talked about burnout as well. And yeah, maybe sorry from switching to this topic, but I think that's a good place to talk about that. So I experienced burnout, I think, once in my life when I was that young manager. I was actually fired from that job because, as I said, I was not the best manager, and it left a strong mark on my experience. At the same time, I'm happy that I had that experience. So there's like that bittersweet moment. So speaking about you, Tomas, and maybe any specific experience in your leadership journey, what is it like to have that workload as a leader, like phenomenologically, subjectively, what it's like to be busy, and how you experience that, and what you do when that burnout reaper comes to your doorstep and says, hello, Tomas, we'll have a nice 2 weeks of very unproductive and emotionally exhausting days.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I did have there were times when I think I for sure had a burnout.
How did you know? How did you know?
Oh, that's a good question. Back, I don't think I knew back then. I don't think I knew back then. Yeah.
But when you think, when you think back, like any specific experience, symptoms, things you experienced that maybe might have showed burnout.
Like one thing is that you stop caring at all.
Yeah.
And I usually care a lot about something, and when I don't care about something, but in a way, as you said, there's all this workload and so on, huge pile of it, then you understand that I remember that when I understood something is wrong, I need to change something. So then I knew that there was a burnout.
So first of all, demoralization. You don't in a way care about the work you do.
It's like, how do I put this? Like, I professionally cared, but no, I didn't care to my heart.
You show that you care.
Yeah. So because at some point you need to professionally care. like how do I put this? Like, if you're a leader in an organization, if at some point you at least don't show that you care, that's really bad. And if you want to do great things, I think you need to care, not just let's say professionally, like you show compassion and so on, but you need to care about it with your whole heart, like, and it's to make it not just about something that you do, I don't know, for money, for fame, titles, whatever. Like these things need to stop matter to you. Like it's something else. It needs to be something above that. So yeah, then, like I knew that I stopped caring, like personally, deeply. I was exhausted, and then, had to do something about it.
How did you experience that exhaustion, like physically?
Yeah, it's, I guess, those usual symptoms that, you can read in the books. It's difficult to wake up, difficult to go to work, like, you feel lack of energy, although like you slept enough, really. You are a lot more angry with your beloved ones, without any like rational reason or something about them. So those, I think, are the signals that something is really off. And of course, like we need to understand that I think that, burnout, I think it's a spectrum. Like, again, not binary. Like when someone says, "Oh, now I'm burnout," like, okay, like, it's what level, degree burnt is it? Like, are you just tired and you just need a weekend off or a few days off, and next day you're fine? Is it that type of burnout, or now you're completely burnt out and you really need to change something?
Just to stop here a bit, because mental health is becoming a more, how to say, talked about topic nowadays, as in Lithuania included. People are starting to use those labels very charitably, so to speak. So trauma, burnout, emotional abuse, it seems that like a small trigger can be one of those three. And I sometimes have to educate clients that, look, your experience is important, it's relevant, there are aspects of that, but that doesn't mean that you have a clinical disorder. And some people they become happy when they realize that okay, there's nothing like clinically wrong with them, but they're still suffering, and we work with that. But some people, it's strange, but a small group of people, they can be dissatisfied that they don't have that diagnosis, and they might feel that, oh, so I don't have burnout, so I'm not special now, so there's that other part, and yeah, interesting topic. But speaking of you, Thomas, so appreciate that you're sharing your experience now. Any like things that helped you go through that process, that helped you, like if you would go through that list that worked in that moment or other moments when you were preventing burnout, what would be your like top 5 things that should be followed if you're in that place, especially if you're a software engineer or leader?
Again, really depends at what point of burnout you are. Like, let's say, as you said, like, is it like you feel just bad and it's not yet, as you said, clinical disorder?
Sure, but let's go through the spectrum of possibility.
Okay. So let's say it's the worst case. Like, like there was no therapist who told me, well, you had a clinical burnout. So it's just an assumption. But the worst the worst burnout I think there was, and I felt personally, what happened, what helped me back then, recently read a book which kind of helped me to rationalize it. So I literally and I told this to my wife in advance, like, now for 1 week I'll just play video games. Sounds stupid completely, I understand. Like, you would say, because now if you now know there are a lot of, like, how to say, advices. Hey, you should do like sports, yoga, like mindfulness, so on, like healthy eating, so on. I'll come back to those things soon, because tried all of those. Like, we'll give my take on that part. But let's say this worst case. So 1 week, just video games, nothing else. Like ordering food to home, like of course, like saying hi to my wife and so on. But at the end of the day, it was still like not even answering any calls or anything. Just played video games.
What did you play?
I think most it was Counter-Strike back then, if I recall correctly. Yeah. So that week, I think it really helped me. It really helped me to get, like to think about different things. And now, like I read this book of how is this film called? Harvard Business Review. Like, we have those small, like little books, like so it also suggested that, hey, instead of like, let's say, like if you feel that something is causing you an extreme stress, you should try, like, the obvious choice would seem, hey, just go away from the stress or try to relax and so on. What it suggested, and I think this helps me now and helped them, just switch to another complex thing for your brain, but something that doesn't cause you stress. Like, you understand, like you're still with your whole mind into that thing. You're playing video games. Like, you need to know there are real people killing each other virtually, like it's serious thing, right? So you're fully focused into that, but it's not causing, that type of stress, which is, like really, really bad for you. So that thing helped me back then. And of course, like I didn't work that week and so on. So I'm not sure if this is the best advice, that
it sounds
you should
interesting.
give the bill, but that worked for me, like at least back then. I'm not sure if it would work again.
Sure.
So let's move into the spectrum.
Yeah, just
where,
one little note. It's
Sure.
something that you did not do when you got burned out. So it's important to realize that it was an activity that you would not do like daily, if I understand you correctly.
Yes.
So correct. It was like an actual switch. So I guess to understand the mechanism, it was something that you would not do daily, but you would do intensively. It just would not cause stress. So I think that idea of switching to something complex, but also interesting and engaging, I think that's the key.
Yeah, completely correct. Like I hadn't played Counter-Strike, I think, like for 5, 7 or more years before that. So yeah.
Okay. So next on the list.
Next on the list. Yeah. So then there was, actually after that, like I again started working and so on. So
you take you took a vacation for a week, or what did you do?
Yeah, it was a vacation, like, for sure. Like I was not in the work.
Okay.
So now let's take an example where, it's let's say mid-level burn.
Mid-level.
Where
senior.
Mid not senior, but mid-level burn. So the usual recommendations are that you should do sports, yoga. I mentioned this a little. So although I'm not into yoga, like I did it maybe a few times in my life, cannot comment, if it helps in the long term. But as you know, like I was really into sports, as an example. I was really into healthy eating. And does that help at the end of the day? It does, although not necessarily, like I would say, like it
these
really
things
depends.
can also give you burnout. That's the problem.
True.
You don't get
too much into it.
You don't get burned out only by work. You get burned out by very stressful, chronic activity that you continue to do without proper resting periods. Basically, that's an idea. So everything, as you said many times, balance, not binary, balance. Yeah.
So I think there are situations in people's lives, and I think that, I had this pretty recently as well, when, like, giving an advice, hey man, just sleep 8.5 hours a day. It's just like, how do you put this? Like, it's impossible, especially for people who have children, small children who are,
and you do, and you do.
Yeah, and I personally do. So, you have a lack of sleep, right? So, because, one of the recommendations how to deal with stress, well, get enough sleep, right? Well, then the other recommendations, do as much physical activity as you can, right? Like not as much as you can, but like there are, let's say, up to 1 hour. I don't know, probably there are different recommendations, but let's say half an hour or whatever. So again, like if you think about someone raising small children, where you as a father also need to help, because it's impossible to do it like for a single parent. Like it is possible unless I don't know, you take so there are ways, but at least I wasn't into that situation. I'm not down. So like it's not that, like just to give an imagination, like you wake up, I don't know, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. I'll put it differently. You don't wake up, you're waked up likely by crying. So here you already start your day, like, like it's not a slow morning. That's your
alarm.
Yeah,
sunrise.
You have an alarm. Like, and I won't tell when did you go to sleep, because that's a different topic. But let's say you wake up at 5:30 in the morning, for example, right, by being alarmed. So and maybe it's not that when you are alone, you can go for coffee, have a slow morning, maybe eat a croissant or whatever. And here, you need to take care of someone. So your morning is already kind of, let's say, a word stressed.
Yeah, work mode.
Right. So yeah, it's a work mode. It's stressed. And so you have that, right? Then, you see, okay, it's time to go to work. Where you quickly need to, I don't know, wrap one child, give it to the mother, take the other child prepared for the kindergarten, which is not easy. You need to prepare, brush the teeth.
And it can be challenging because children, for example, might not be willing to brush their teeth, and you have to play those games. So it's another story. Yeah,
exactly. So and now like, okay, finally, after spending time in the traffic, now you're in the office, right? So you already had like probably 3.5 hours of stress, so you're like kind of warmed up.
You're worked up already.
Worked up already. Like I personally, like I do read emails, like I check my emails a little in advance. Like very important rule, I've turned all notifications off.
That helps
a lot. Like I choose when to check, I don't know, apps, not they choose me. Like, of course, I can get a call, and I know that if something really terrible happens, I will get a call. So I know that. So that helps me. So I'm already at work, probably more or less I know what to expect, but every day is a surprise usually. And throughout the day, again, you have a lot of meetings, a lot of interactions with other people, a lot of problems, something is happening, for many people. So you need to understand that one thing you should realize that there will never be a moment when you will be able to do everything. That's one very, very important topic, because if I see this especially at people who just recently got into leadership, that they want to help everyone, want to do everything
in the company, you mean?
Yeah, in the company, like work related, to help everyone and so on. And at some point, you need to understand that you need to start prioritizing. You need to start saying no, and and quite often start saying no. So that's one realization you need to make. And once you realize that it's impossible to do everything, that's the first part, where you need to be able to calmly say no, and okay, that's it. Like you just pushed away some of the problems. Of course, there are problems that you cannot push away sometimes, but if there are everyday such problems, then probably something is fundamentally wrong. Like usually there isn't, or you maybe need to change your mindset about it.
So essentially, to summarize, what you're saying is one thing. It could be changing the activity, so what we already discussed, and doing something interestingly engaging and positively stressful. The other thing is to realizing that all those physical activity might not necessarily be easily doable, and you have to be critical about that and compassionate towards yourself, that just because you're not doing physical activity, it's not that you're doing something wrong. And the third thing, let's say, not using notifications, and being more conscious about what you're reading and what you're not, saying no to colleagues, which it can be difficult, and it's a topic on its own. And
and I think
anything else?
I didn't say that the most important. I already went to the telling about my day. They forgot a little about saying that this is how to deal with when you're in bad situation. So I think at the end of the day, you need to realize that you need to answer yourself. One thing is why you're doing that, and I think it's very important. Like why are you doing those things? Like why did you get yourself into a situation? Why did you choose to be in a certain role where it's high pressure role? why did you do that? Like, you really need to answer yourself, because, you know, if you will have wrong choices, you will probably burn out.
Okay, so I want to climb the career ladder. I want to earn more. I want.
But why? Why do you need that?
That's
like, you can do that without
that's
being in a
something
leadership role.
that my environment does. So that's normal.
But that's a misconception. Look, like, you know, especially in software engineering, you know, like if you think that there is a very huge differences in, let's say, compensation between management and, you know, individual contributors who are like amazing, that's not really true. Like, you know, you can also, I don't know, you can do your own business, be alone, right? So money you can also do without being a manager.
So what was your reason, if you can share?
I would like not to share.
Why?
I'm sorry for that, but yeah,
Why?
I would like not to share it. It's a personal thing, I would say.
Power?
No. It's more no.
Okay.
I would choose.
I will
choose
respect
not to
that.
share that.
Let's leave it
Thank
for
you.
let's leave it for the second podcast. Okay.
Okay.
Maybe you will be warmed up more. Okay.
Yeah,
So maybe to wrap it up a bit, there are still topics that we did not touch more. In particular, maybe your specific experiences working in different leadership roles. So maybe for next time, right? But maybe to wrap it up, Thomas. So we discussed many things. We discussed we discussed your journey. We discussed capitalism. We discussed the developer experience. We talked about burnout. Any like specific core conclusions that you maybe drew from this discussion that you would like maybe for people to take away from this conversation? What would it be? What do you think?
Like, I think that these are times when, you know, everybody is under a huge stress. I would like, you know, to spend a little, like, to conclude on the stress part, because I think it's important to many people, and especially in software engineering. And as you said, like, there are research, you know, people with depression and so on. And I think there is quite a tendency to have that pressure. Of course, it depends. It varies company by company.
Yeah.
Like team by team, situation by situation, person by person. So I think it's really important to understand, you know, why you're doing certain things. You really need to like it. Also, you know, maybe there will be listeners who are thinking of choosing, you know, software engineering. And I've seen myself, you know, it's not a uncommon question. Hey, no, I want to go into coding. You know, they write in newspapers, you give amazing salaries. No, I want to do it. If you do it just for that, I'm sure you will burn out. Like, you will just, you know, by the time you will try to do it more professionally, like, you will realize either that it will take you too long to get into it, you know, full time to do it professionally, or I don't know, like, it would be extremely difficult. So you need to answer yourself, you know, why you're doing that. You need to tell yourself that you won't be able ever to do everything. You need to understand that, you know, the pressure, like, how do you put this? It's about how you perceive all the signals around. Like, you need to understand that one thing you can control for sure is how you perceive other things, because there might be days where, you know, 10, 20 random people will come to you asking questions which, you know, all urgent, all critical, all impacting business and so on. So you need to, you know, understand that, you know, it's about the only thing you can control. You cannot control those people not coming to you. And, you know, you need to understand that you have no control. And for people, like, you know, speaking of people in software, like, probably here I'm a little biased, but I think there is this, we can make that generalization, but in code, we can control things, right? We can control software, we can change the code lines. Changing people is a lot more difficult. Changing the workload is a lot more difficult. Changing, you know, the amount of customers coming to your company who use your software and raise great bugs and so on is hard to control. You cannot control those things. So I think, like, this is where those stress things can happen, especially for people, you know, in more senior software engineering positions or leadership roles related to software. You need to realize that, you know, it's something that will happen. that you cannot control, focus, on your perception of those things. Try to find methods, and I don't think, like, I really don't like when, and I hope I didn't sound myself as that kind of person where, like, oh, I've been living this sad life or something, and now I found this method, and now everything is fine. Like, this happens in fairy tales. Like,
That's a process.
You read a fairy tale and the ending is amazing. Like, they live there,
Happy ever after.
thereafter. Yeah. But I don't think that's how it happens. No, the world doesn't end, the life doesn't end with that. There's a continuous process. Like, you think that you found the solution, but there will be other problems. So you should continuously learn how to deal with those. So
yeah, I think what I'm taking from your summary is expectations management, is what you expect from yourself as a person, why you expect that, and of course why expect from others. And I guess when those expectations are properly aligned with your values and reality, I think that's the sweet spot that we might strive for. And of course, it's a process. It's always a learning process, and knowing yourself also is a process which takes time. It needs effort. So yeah, I really appreciate our conversation. It was, as I said, there was that coaching moment, and I'm really grateful for that as well.
I'm really grateful you invited. I think it was an amazingly interesting conversation. You remember, like, how much time it took us to get into this point. But I hope, like, it's not just us thinking this sounded great, but those who will listen will also say, well, maybe it was interesting, and they will find something.
And on that note of expectation management, even if that's us, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Okay, so thank you, Tomas. Till next time.
Thank you. Till next time.